Dr. John, Dr. J-Lo. How are you, man? Good to see you.
I'm great. How are you, Spencer?
I can call you Dr. J-Lo,
You can
right?
call me Dr. J-Lo. Yeah.
I can't be the first person, though, that's used that.
No, not at all. Within the company of Maritime, I'm known as Dr. J-Lo, and it's funny to see emails come across.
I was going to say, like,
J-Lo,
is that what they call you on
hey.
Slack? Or you guys use Slack or any internal messaging system like that? Like, people are probably...
Yeah, we use Skype.
Skype. Okay, right. So you're probably Dr. J-Lo on everybody else's machine, I would imagine. Because why wouldn't you call you Dr. J-Lo? It fits, man.
I keep telling my boss I need a business card that says that.
Yeah, I know, right? Dr. J-Lo, RVP Maritime, baby. Well, hey, good to have you, man. Really appreciate you joining me. I'm excited to dig into many, many things. I want to hopefully get a chance to talk about the Corps, Marine Corps, CrossFit. That's going to be in my wheelhouse as well. And then even some of this trapeze flying that you've been doing here recently as well. But of course, today we're going to be talking about TPA services again. Maritime, third-party administrator. Obviously, there's an affiliation with Aetna. We dove into that topic a few weeks back with Jennifer Morgan at Collective Health. But, this isn't a commercial for anybody, right? I don't necessarily want to highlight one or the other. This is an objective conversation about the space and what, maybe what the differences that you bring to the table for your clients. But before we get into that, man, why don't we get to know Dr. J-Lo a little bit? I imagine that's not your birth name, but Dr. J-Lo, why don't you tell us a little bit about you, personal and professional?
Sure. So, from College Station, Texas, born and raised in Texas, and of course went to Texas A&M.
Of course,
and
right?
Then,
Obviously, yeah.
Went to grad school at the University of Arkansas. Got my master's and my doctorate there.
A doctorate in education, correct?
In education,
yeah,
correct. Cool. Yeah.
And does that have like a specification, or what does that entail?
More specifically, education leadership.
Okay.
So really taking a look at, the thought process, the theory behind leadership, what different leaders are looking at, as well as, how do people learn? So, what's the best way? I'm a huge visual learner, huge auditory learner as well. The best part about being on this podcast is, I think I mentioned earlier, Joe Rogan's my favorite podcast.
Yep.
It's my bucket list to be on Joe Rogan's podcast.
Well, hey, you always have to come through me first before you get to Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
I think that's step 2, right?
Yeah. I mean, now you've got your own Jamie behind the scenes.
Shout out to Weston. What's up, dude?
Hello. So yeah, it's I probably have a crazy journey into the insurance world, and then personally, I have my bachelor's degree in kinesiology.
Cool.
So, kind of a crazy degree to achieve and bring into the business world and bring into the insurance world. It's been...
Well, yeah, that's one thing that fascinated. Sometimes, obviously, I know the folks that I'm bringing on, but then I'll go look, what's the work history? I don't know everything about everybody's history. And yours is really interesting, right? Obviously, the educational pathway that you went down. And then I saw there was some, obviously you spent some time in the Marine Corps. I don't know if you want to talk about that. Was that pre or post the doctorate?
Yeah, pre-doctorate.
Pre-doctorate,
yeah.
okay.
So this was post Texas A&M. So I got my bachelor's degree, went to officer candidate school. And oftentimes what I tell people when they ask me, what did you do in the Marine Corps? I tell them I got hurt.
You got hurt? Okay.
So I tore my shoulder in training, and then have recovered from that. And I would love to say that got me into the world of insurance.
Yeah.
But it didn't. So that was probably my first experience with government provided insurance, and it was a headache, if you can imagine. Mm-hmm. So now, what I often get to do is parallel how I deal with the VA and going to the clinics here and that experience, and then what is in the private sector. And having both experiences, having public and private insurance, has really changed my perspective on what we're looking at and how we're looking at.
I was gonna say, I imagine you seeing it firsthand, right? Some of the struggles, perhaps. Somebody that hasn't been in that world doesn't necessarily know, other than you get third-hand information about what that experience is like. Do you think it shaped your vision of the private sector more positively after that experience, or did it attract you to go into insurance to a degree after that?
No. So I have a very positive view of the private insurance market, based off of my experience of the public sector as well as my experience in the private sector. But what happened after I got hurt was, I went to grad school and then started working for University of Arkansas, managing a federal grant there that was designed to help veterans get into college. So it's that transitional issue of leaving the military on what do I do now? So do I go get my degree? Everyone tells me education is the way to go, or do I go into the workforce? So trying to help an individual decide that was basically my job for several years. And then, moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. There's not a huge higher education scene there. So getting a job was very troublesome. So my wife at the time and I bought a CrossFit. So
I was wondering when the CrossFit, where that foray and how that happened. So you guys bought a box, as they say,
yeah,
right?
bought a box.
Okay.
And
I ex-CrossFitter myself, and I feel like if you've done CrossFit, you're obligated to bring it up unnecessarily in conversation. So I'll do that. But yeah, I spent 5 years doing it here locally. So you guys bought a box, right?
Yeah, we bought a box,
Okay.
Took it over, and I ran that for a while. And then, what got me into insurance was I had a member that was an employee benefits consultant. So shout out to Cole Rogers with now McGriff Insurance in Little Rock, getting me into the business. And we just had a conversation over lunch one day. Hey, what do you do for a living? Here's what I do as a business owner. And literally the pitch to me, if you will, was I do that every day for a living, just within the realm of insurance.
Sure.
We talk about business problems. We talk about how that's handled with insurance. And it's the number 2 expense usually on someone's P&L. Mm-hmm. So handling more of a business problem instead of insurance. So that's what got me into the insurance.
So did you go into a production role at McGriff at the time, or what was your actual specific role?
Sure.
Yeah.
So at the time it was Regions Insurance.
Okay.
And then McGriff made the acquisition after I left. So I went into the production role. They had a new producer school or training, if you will. So I learned through that, and really what got me into the self-funding world was the practice leader at the time. He's now the practice leader of McGriff, Tom Hayes, said, "You know what, Jonathan? If you want to get ahead in this game, you need to learn self-funding. That's the future of the business. That's the current state. You will set yourself apart from what he called the lazy 95% of broker consultants out there." He's just like, they want to set it and forget it.
Yeah.
Don't do that. Dive into the nitty gritty, the minutia of what self-funding is, and you will separate yourself. So that's what got me into self-funding. So we moved to Dallas after I got into insurance, and then worked for Regions McGriff here, and then was recruited over to go work for USI. And was at USI for about 2.5 years. And then Meritain recruited me to come over and, hey, here's what we are. And I had never heard of Meritain before interviewing with them. So I was like, oh, well, I know Aetna.
Who attain? Yeah, no. Yeah. That's funny, though. It's interesting, though. And you, by the way, you got great advice from Tom Hayes, you said is his name?
Tom Hayes, yeah.
Amazing advice, because I would actually literally echo that same advice to anybody that's listening to this podcast that hasn't maybe hasn't ventured into the self-funded space or is thinking about it or heard about it. Literally, I would advocate anybody that's in the insurance industry become educated. And that's part of the purpose of this, because you will immediately differentiate yourself. Totally agree with that. Plus, I find it infinitely more interesting than 100%, right? Which you can attest to and we'll dig into. It's just, there's so many more moving parts in self-funded, and there's so many more niches that I think that you can find that are specifically of interest to you. Of course, like we said, we're bringing it here to present day, which is working with Meritain, who is a third-party administrator. As I mentioned, of course, before, I've had one other individual, Jennifer over at Collective Health, talking about TPAs, but I feel like the TPA role is so integral to the success of a self-funded plan that it's not something that we just want to spend 45 minutes on and be done with it.
Sure.
Especially as there's many different types of TPAs with different size segments and different spaces and different value propositions. So if you don't mind, again, why don't you tell me what you think the role of a third-party administrator is in the self-funded lexicon?
Sure. So I always tell people I'm an overeducated idiot. So I love to ask questions. I love to find things out, even though I have my doctorate.
Yeah.
So and I love movies. So I talk a lot in analogies and metaphors on, hey, how can we relate this to something easy? Because I'm an idiot at the end of the day. So the way I often like to really describe what we do is, have you seen the John Wick movies?
I think I've seen one, and I think I turned off two after he killed like the 1,000th person. I was like, I kind of know where this is going. But anyways, I know of them, and they're good.
So I'm a huge John Wick fan. Okay. Love the movie, love Keanu Reeves as a person and an actor. Well, in the third John Wick, an adjudicator comes to town.
Oh, okay.
So we are an adjudicator. And what happens in the movie is the adjudicator lays out everything that transpired before she got there. So what they do is say, hey, here's what happened. John Wick killed Senor D'Antonio in the Continental Hotel with a Kimber 11, used 7 bullets. So that's kind of what Meritain does as a TPA. We lay out everything. Where did the procedure happen? How much did it cost? Should it have cost that? Is it in line with the Aetna contracted rate for the network? Mm-hmm. Who was the provider? And we're laying all that out there to make sure everything matches up 100%. So what I really like to talk about is we're advocates for healthier living. So we really believe on being proactive, on setting up a relationship with your PCP, your primary care physician, and taking care of things from the very beginning. That way they don't get into that realm of the high cost claimants. Mm-hmm. And, we're tackling that, earlier than a lot of our competitors as well.
So a proactive involvement in maybe preventing or at least mitigating something that could turn into a catastrophic event, a catastrophic claim, right? As you guys are looking to engage earlier on instead of retroactively, right?
Yes, correct. And the way I look at it is what we're trying to accomplish during this whole process of being that adjudicator is really making sure that the individual member is receiving the proper level of care while keeping the total cost of care low.
Yes.
So making sure we're really trying to manage that budget for our client on their P&L. Like I said before, it's usually the second or third highest expense. So we're trying to be a good fiduciary partner to that company. Usually it's the CFO that we're talking to and a director of HR.
Yeah, and that's why I feel like your role is so crucial in this mix, because by the time something gets to a stop loss vendor or a carrier, of course, they're going to reimburse it if it's already a big claim, or they might get involved to a degree in making sure the claim's eligible and was it a reasonable and customary payment level and those sorts of things. But it's almost kind of too late at that point, right? The TPA is acting as that buffer in between them and a catastrophic event that's being reimbursed. And I think you guys actually have the ability to impact the results a lot more than maybe a carrier would on the back end of that. So you mentioned adjudication, yes. Right? Like, can we unpack that a little bit? What does it mean fully to adjudicate a claim? Not necessarily just in the context of the great analogy of John Wick, which I love that. I'm going to probably be your snippet. I'm going to be honest.
No problem.
But the adjudication of a claim, like what are we looking at to make sure a claim is processed properly?
So really it's a fancy way to say, what does the life of this claim look like from when that procedure initially started by making the appointment to going in and getting whatever service was done and what was used during that. We're really taking a look at all of it. Was there fraud, waste, and abuse? Should it have been done at that facility? Was it billed in properly? Because we see that fairly often. And you mentioned usury and customary cost as well. Does that match up with the Aetna contracted rate, since we are Aetna provider? So really just seeing it from the analogy I hear all the time is from cradle to grave of that claim when it came in. So when it was first charged to, hey, we're doing all these what's the word I'm thinking of? The due diligence of the claim.
Yeah.
So really looking at the diligence of it on, does everything match up? Okay, great. Let's process the claim.
Okay.
And we're doing that at a better rate, I would say, than our competition, because we're looking at several different aspects of it. And like I mentioned earlier, we're looking at those high cost claimants at an earlier time. So our benchmark really is at $15,000.
Is it so just a flat threshold of anything that's over 15 is when you guys get engaged? Is that
that's when we're really diving in deep. So our to use the word adjudication again, auto adjudication, that a lot of the carriers talk about, our auto adjudication rate is 85%, 90%. Ours is 64%.
Okay.
So what that means for people is we actually have eyes on claims. So actual people looking at everything that we talked about previously on, hey, there's this matchup. Okay, before we pay utilizing our client's money, we're going to make sure everything's legitimate.
Well, and I'm with you there. I would prefer a lower auto adjudication rate because that means there's extra scrutiny, right? You don't necessarily want everything to be rubber stamped without anybody looking at it. The whole intent is to prevent something that was ineligible or fraudulent or overcharged or something to that extent, or multiple, reasons like that. Auto adjudicating to me doesn't seem like something I'm going to be excited about as a broker or as an employer, that your auto adjudication rate is very high. And it sounds like you probably agree, and that's kind of the methodology that you take, is like, we're going to spend more time on a higher percentage of claims actually looking at them in more detail, right?
100%. And it happens often. When you really dive deep into some of these claims that come in, you start to notice a pattern. You start to notice things that don't add up to you necessarily. So one client that we looked at recently that was a high cost claimant was a COVID claim. So, obviously we're getting a lot of those in, we're finding some patterns, and there are a couple of things that did match up. And, this was a particular client that came from the fully insured market. So they weren't used to diving deep into some of these details.
Yeah.
So we looked at the bill and said, why is this, why is there $1,000 charge for testing? And it was a COVID test, a flu test, a strep test, a pneumonia test. And we were like, all these were not necessary. So we pushed back on them. And we even saw some other charges. One in particular I bring up all the time because I see it fairly often is a mucus retrieval system. And it was $300.
I'm gonna presume that's something like a Q-tip or to that extent, right? Or
the box of tissues.
Tissues. Okay, all right. I was close. Mucus retrieval system.
Yeah. So
I'm gonna tell my daughter when she needs to blow her nose, hey, go get a mucus retrieval device instead of a Kleenex. That's ridiculous.
So it's small things like that we pick up on in the market, and we're just like, we're not paying $300 for a box of tissues.
Yep.
Like we could go down to the dollar store and buy it for $1.
Yeah.
So it's us pushing back on them and making sure everything matches.
Well, it's accountability, right? I mean, we hear the word accountability all the time, but there's an intentionality with charging you $300 for a box of Kleenex and calling it a mucus retrieval system. Whether or not that's borderline fraudulent, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to make that claim, but the intent there seems to be to at least mislead, if not just simply overcharge for something that doesn't need to be charged to that extent. It's frustrating as somebody I'm a person that consumes healthcare just like everybody else, and to know that sort of thing is prevalent is frustrating, right, to hear, especially in a specific circumstance like that. Good thing you guys are obviously getting involved. I mean, so do you go back to the provider and say, nope, or what's that process look like to get that through to, an approved claim that's paid?
Sure. So personally, I don't handle that.
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
Our team handles that. So there's a whole team behind me and our clients that make me look good and make the broken consultant look good as well for pairing with Meritain. So really going through that and pushing back on the provider on, hey, that's not the contracted rate for a box of tissues. That's not, the other tests besides the COVID tests were not necessary. And yes, we understand a lot of the symptoms are the same, but what are people mainly, worried about right now? COVID-19. So let's test for that, not the flu and pneumonia, everything else. And, for us, we like I said, we see these patterns and we pick up on it and kind of, put a little check mark. Hey, red flag, let's look at this, let's push back. And often that negotiation starts to happen. Majority of the time we win.
What I'm going to say, there's probably a snowball's effect. So you catch a certain instance where you guys red flag it and go, oh, that's new. That's something that we haven't seen before. Does that also become sort of I don't want to say not everybody's using machine learning, but does that become an instance where you go, all right, well, we flagged this here and it turns out we caught something? Do you go back and look retroactively to see if that's happened in recent times on other cases, or how does that apply kind of going forward to your logic of adjudicating?
So how it happens is we use it on a go-forward basis.
Okay.
So really mapping out what providers we're seeing it with and pushing back on them. and way above my pay grade. But that then goes to, should we be doing business with this provider if we consistently see fraud, waste, and abuse on it? Are we going to need to report them to the medical board? So really looking at those instances where, okay, how are we going to map this out for the future? And that helps us even create a new blueprint for what we're looking at. So what should a COVID test cost? What should a pneumonia test cost? And, as we all know, with the inflation in healthcare, everything's getting a little bit convoluted. But the great thing about some of the previous administrations' healthcare transparency policies that they passed were, now we're kind of taking back the veil on all of this and looking at that. And that's where I see the near future of healthcare going.
Well, that's what I say. If there's anything that I see coming up almost on every one of these episodes is transparency. Transparency means a little bit different thing to each person. The level of transparency, of course, means different things to different people. But I don't know if anybody that can truly argue against some level of transparency, an additional level of transparency in our healthcare system today. So, apolitical, it doesn't matter what you think about. It's like transparency is a good thing that should benefit all parties involved, and it should identify fraud, waste, and abuse. I know you said that a couple times. But can we take a step back? Because there's something I really want to delineate here, especially as Meritain, the affiliation with CVS Aetna, like you described before. A lot of times people feel like they have this choice of ASO versus TPA, right? So could you help me define the admin services only route maybe with Aetna versus a Meritain? And it's not to pitch you against each other, just maybe describe the different reasoning as to why an employer would choose one over the other.
So that's a great question. It's one that I answer all the time working with brokerage firms here in the Dallas area, and I cover Oklahoma as well. Okay. So it's, why should we use you over Aetna or any of the BUCAs, Blue, United, Cigna, Aetna? And oftentimes, it's an overused word in our industry, in the TPA industry, is flexibility. So what we get on the Meritain side versus the ASO side is the flexibility of fitting with some of those third-party vendors, or we call them point solution partners, such as Zero Health. Courtney was just on. She was talking about the services they provide. We can fit in a lot better on, with our chassis and our platform than Aetna does, because they're what I call, inside the box. So again, like I said, I'm the overeducated idiot. I like using analogies. So it's like building your own computer system. So you have an Apple, I have an iPad, same thing. We're buying this great thing outside the box. So fantastic product, correct?
Yeah. Agreed. Yeah. Turnkey solution. Don't have to think about it, right?
Not too much more you have to do. Well, you can't really upgrade it, can you? Can't really upgrade the Mac too much. Yeah. You can't really upgrade the iPad.
Maybe somebody smarter than me could upgrade it, but certainly not me.
You can't really strip it down either. Yeah. So we allow you to build your computer from scratch or your iPad from scratch using the top of the line battery or the top of the line screen. Whatever you want to do, we want to build it for you from scratch, utilizing some of the same blueprints that Aetna uses. For instance, the CP2 network, the broadest network that Aetna provides at the deepest discounts, and then coupling that with our partnership or ownership, really. I call it the enterprise, CVS Enterprise. So, really back channeling, sorry, that's a bad word, back channeling, but really piggybacking off of the PBM ownership of CVS Caremark. And now we're bringing pharmaceutical solutions or RX, PBM solutions to the table as well, and saying, hey, here's what we have from the Aetna platform. Here's what we have from the CVS platform. Here's how we're meshing it together. We're giving you, the best prices in the market from the RX standpoint, as well as the biggest rebates as well. And then we're pairing that with the Aetna network. And on top of that, you don't have to just utilize that. You can utilize Zero Card. You can utilize Hinge Health, which is a musculoskeletal company that we deal with, and really seeing benefits go in the direction that they're going, partnering with some of the newer people out there, such as Regenx.
Yeah.
Stem cells and platelets. big partner of ours. I actually am getting stem cells into my shoulder from the shoulder I tore in the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So it's really, you don't have to go under the knife anymore. And going under a knife often leads to those high cost claimants.
Yeah, complications.
So, Regenx, Zero Card, Hinge Health, those are all some of our closest partners that are helping reducing that total cost of care while still providing that excellence of care.
Yeah. Well, I think you mentioned flexibility, and maybe it is overused. It doesn't matter. It's applicable, right? Flexibility in what you are kind of allowed to do, what you don't get pushback against. And, it's not necessarily to say one model is wrong and one model is right. I've always gravitated more towards the independence that a TPA provides because of that flexibility that you describe. I presume, right, different stop loss vendors, doesn't matter. If somebody wants to carve out a PBM on their own, I would presume they have that option as well, right?
100%.
Yeah.
So that's another, thanks for that little segue.
Of course. Hey man, that's my job. Yeah.
We're pretty agnostic when it comes to carving out stop loss, carving out PBM as well. So, if you have a preferred stop loss vendor, if you have a preferred PBM vendor, that's fine by us. We don't really care. But on the BUCA ASO side, they do. Often the number I see is under 500 employees enrolled. You can't carve out stop loss. You can't carve out PBM. Well, there may be a lot of money in that area where you can shave off some points to really lower that total cost of care by keeping the same benefits. And all you did was say, hey, we're going to unbundle all this and really pick out what we like. What kind of PBM vendor we like, what's the third-party stop loss, which I know that's your background. That's kind of how we met in this industry. Was here's what we're looking at. And by the way, I loved your previous videos that you would post all the time on LinkedIn.
Oh, the stop loss ones. Yeah,
the stop loss. One. It was a great reminder of what you learn in the business of what stop loss is the number one piece when dealing with self-funding. So how, what's the contract? What should that look like? What's the spec rate? And looking at all those different levels, that's stuff that we help negotiate or just stay away from. Like I said, we're agnostic.
Well, I love that. Agnostic means not necessarily that you won't get involved, right? It's just that you don't have to control everything, which I appreciate, right? It leaves it up to the employer. You can direct them, you can encourage certain things, but it doesn't mean that, no, I'm the gatekeeper and these are your options, take it or leave it. Again, that's the independence that I value. Is there instances where, it isn't the right fit? They're probably better off with an ASO model. Is it a certain size segment, like you were saying, or is it maybe employers that just generally want something more turnkey and don't want to have to think as much about these moving parts?
What I often see is the employee size doesn't necessarily dictate whether they should be partnered with a TPA or traditional ASO. What I often see is really the thought process. I would call it education versus indoctrination.
Okay.
So we have indoctrinated companies to purchase insurance instead of manage their healthcare plan. So what I mean by that is they're used to looking at a premium and setting it and forgetting it on the fully insured platform instead of looking at all those details on the self-funded side. So, more indoctrination versus education. So really interacting with those partners that get it and say, okay, well, let's do carve everything out, or let's keep it together within your platform. And it's really taking a case-by-case basis on, is the company educated enough to understand self-funding and why it makes sense to look at unbundling everything? And does the broker consultant understand that as well? So if you're
I can attest to that. I was just gonna you triggered something in my mind that I experienced. Right, what did you just said? It was we've trained people to purchase. Sorry, you just said that indoctrination. Yeah, and I think it's true. I experienced that as a stop loss carrier. You triggered my mind, and my thought went there for a second. I would get brokers that were so hung up on a couple of percentage points on fixed costs, whereas those fixed costs in the entire picture made up 20% of the total plan spend, maybe less than that, because really the claims are the driver, right? Not your stop 100%. Loss, but they felt, well, I can control this 2% negotiation over here that's a few $1,000s annually, but ignore the real drivers of the employer's cost, which is the claims dollars. And that's that indoctrination that, and nothing against any broker, but it's just simply like you are trained to negotiate insurance rates. You're not necessarily trained and educated on how to lower actual cost drivers, which, by the way, will lower your insurance rates if you attack those instead. But it's just kind of changing people's mindset of what's important to really focus on. And maybe it's just the way the business is done, and that's what we're trying to shake this industry out of a little bit. It seems like you have the same MO from your perspective.
Same MO. And what I often talk about, like I said, I don't really work in the world of insurance. I work in the world of healthcare and really economics when you think about it, business problem solving. So, like you mentioned, 80% is made up of claims, which often is 20%.
Oh, yeah, 20% of the people are driving 80% of those claims.
In economics, that's called the Pareto principle.
Yeah. Yep.
So 20% of the actions make up 80% of the results. So we're trying to help manage that 20% that equals that 80%, like you said, is the true cost driver. Mm-hmm. And, oftentimes we're not the cheapest ASO rate. We're not the cheapest fixed cost. But we're helping you lower that 80% to make us affordable or in line with some of our competitors.
What I imagine that differs the sales. One of the things I wanted to ask you specifically is like that's part of the sales process, right? I came from a carrier that sometimes was more expensive than the competition, but we were expected that was the case, and you're selling different value outside of just pure price, pure economics there. So, when you're going in and sort of presenting that value proposition versus maybe a very low admin rate that could also maybe be misleading as well, what are you doing to really say, well, yeah, but here's what you're getting. Here's what I'm focused on. Don't fixate so much on just that PEPM number that's maybe a little bit higher. What can we do long-term to fix your problems, right?
100%. And again, it's another piece that I have constant conversations around. Mm-hmm. Of, well, you're not the cheapest. One of your competitors is $4 cheaper than you. Or what I often hear is they're $20 cheaper than you. And I'm like, well, what are you comparing? Well, they have a rebate admin credit. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Well, you didn't request that from me, so I didn't put that on my proposal.
Yeah.
But we can match that, and that's just taking the rebates from your PBM and putting them toward that fixed cost, which, the best analogy I love to use for that I got it from Logan over at GDP is
Logan Berry, what's up, man?
Squeezing the balloon.
Squeezing the balloon.
So
okay.
Fixed cost, you think of it as that balloon. So you're just squeezing it, and you're just moving that money somewhere else.
Yep.
It's not necessarily saving you money, but that's why we continue to go back to that 80%, talking about the claim spend on it. On hey, here's really what we're looking at. This 80% is what we're going to impact. If you're worried about that fixed cost, maybe the best partner for you is traditional ASO or a competitor.
Yeah, and then that's also you kind of decipher who is the appropriate client, I think, from your perspective as well. If they can't get over that number and that's all they worry about, well, maybe they weren't the right fit, what you guys are bringing. Of course, we're salespeople. We want to sell every case. I get it.
We think we're going to sell everything.
Yeah,
we want to sell everything.
But not everybody is the right fit for different motivations. I was going to ask you, though, selfishly want to talk stop loss for a moment, if that's okay.
Sure.
When I was selling stop loss directly, it's been a few years now, and then wholesaling it a couple years ago as well, I felt like they were moving a little bit away from the TPA channel as the primary procurer of stop loss. I felt like that used to be the case more often than not, and then you see GAs pop up, you see brokers being more, I would say, proficient in marketing themselves. Do you think that's trending still that direction, or are you guys still marketing quite a bit of stop loss on yourself?
I would say we're seeing a trend toward the broker doing it, as well as and doing it through third-party stop-loss partners.
Yeah, GA, general agent.
GA, such as Stealth.
Yeah.
So, the other thing I like to point out, too, is the number one E&O claim for brokers.
Agree.
Stop-loss.
Yep.
So, it's, misplacing stop-loss or, placing it with the wrong stop-loss partner or messing up the contract and costing the company a couple $100,000. So, we're seeing it shift out more towards those GAs and what I've been more successful on for my broker partners is actually coming to the table and talking to the reinsurer on their behalf.
Okay.
So I did that for a large municipality and helped save them 7%.
Okay.
By having a conversation of how we handle claims, what we're looking at, what our network looks like, coupling that with the PBM, and okay, well let's recalculate this, because now it makes a little bit more sense in their eyes on what they're looking at. So even having those conversations, even though we're not placing a stop loss, is why I say we're truly agnostic. Like, we're still going to go to bat for our clients.
Well, and not to say that it doesn't make sense to have your TPA place a stop loss. I covered that in a video. You know, one of the downsides, of course, is if that TPA brings you stop loss numbers, it's for that TPA and their network. So if you were perhaps looking at other options for administrative services, then that quote wouldn't qualify, right? They'd have to go through somebody else. So, yeah, one of the small downsides, but also I think from your perspective, you guys have a lot of the data, right? You guys are managing, you have the insights of that particular employer's claims. So you should be able to, like you said, negotiate slightly better on their behalf. Now, you know, the GAs have become a specialty, and I think they specialize specifically in stop loss. I was at a GA, so I understand why that model is working and maybe becoming more prominent. But, you know, there's certainly not to say that the TPA doesn't bring value in that process. I think the point is you have options, right? The point is you get 100%. To decide as a broker, as a consultant, as an employer, which route you want to take. At the end of the day, you're probably going to get relatively similar numbers. It's just do those things coordinate? Do you have a TPA that knows how to properly file claims, to pull them from a PBM and combine them with the medical claims if it's a separate PBM? Those things are more important, I think, at the end of the day, than necessarily who is doing the shopping of the stop loss itself. It may make my 2 cents, but I could be wrong.
And what I often try to say to our broker partners and clients is, pick one and go with it.
Yes.
Flooding the market with a bunch of different quotes doesn't help. Because they all talk to each other.
Well, they talk to each other, and
say,
the carriers
we got
also
this
know not to I'm not going to give 17 different quotes in the marketplace and compete against myself. They're doing their best to also give coordinated quotes that are in line with each other, right? Because then you start promoting favoritism, or why did they get a better rate than I got a better rate? And you have these weird conversations. So yeah, it does not benefit anybody to have 4 different channels marketing to the same stop loss carriers with the same group. It's wasting time.
Yeah, and I look at it as, you know, you just received 4 copies of your homework. Are you going to redo all 4 of them? I mean, math doesn't change.
Yeah.
So it's okay. Well, we're just going to give everybody the same rate, and there's not going to be a differential. So.
Well, that's the mentality that you said, right? It's like, I'm just going to shop rates, and whoever gives me the best rates is not necessarily strategic in what you're trying to accomplish. But I think you're right. Like, pick a channel, maybe 2 if you need to go with an independent channel, so you can shop other TPAs. You know, that's so be it. But 3 or 4, or every channel you can possibly think of is a waste of time. So let's talk about a little more technical stuff, if you don't mind, because I love to get in the weeds to a degree. But I think it's important to maybe understand the coordination of claims coming off fully insured. And then maybe the second part of this question will be coordinating claims between, hey, I've moved administrators, now I've got run out and run in. So whichever one you want to tackle first, but let's talk a little more technical about the claims coordination process.
So the way I look at that question is you're talking about transition of care.
Yes. Yep.
So industry-wide, we've kind of agreed we don't want to interrupt care. I'll use cancer specifically as an example. So you don't want to interrupt Jane Doe's cancer treatment and say, okay, well, they're no longer in network. That drug is no longer approved. That isn't being an advocate for healthier living. So traditionally, and definitely at Meritain, it's let's take over what they currently have, and we will process that provider as in network, even if it's not in network. Okay. And then if it's a drug that isn't necessarily covered, which would be very odd in a cancer situation because most drugs are covered, let's go ahead and refill that. And we'll set a date for it and have that conversation. Our medical management team will reach out to the provider and have that conversation on, do we need to change site of service? Do we need to change potentially the drug? And here's why we would bring that up.
But always putting the member as kind of the primary pedestal. Yeah. Okay, I love it. And then from a coordination standpoint, I think one of the things that brokers need to maybe understand is transitioning between TPAs when you're already self-funded. who's managing what, who's managing run out and run in. Can you talk to me about how you guys might intervene and step in to make sure that claims aren't being, dropped through the gap, or,
Sure.
I'd love to hear somebody that's inside, talk about that a little bit.
Again, I don't personally handle that. Or one of our teams handles it, but it's really making sure that there's that seamless transition from who they were with to who they're coming to. And it's really getting stop loss to talk to stop loss. And then, understanding, hey, we're now switching over to Meritain instead of this TPA, or we switch from this ASO. So really shoring up that communication, and making sure that, okay, our team that's now handling the account is talking to their team. And now they're going to have a new ID card, and it's going to have our number on there, Meritain. It's going to have the Aetna network, and they're going to know who to go to, and it's really clearing up that static that's out there for communication.
Well, that's communication, coordination between the vendors, right? Even if you're competitive vendors, it doesn't have to be unfriendly. We talked to a stop loss carrier a couple years ago. And real prominent stop loss carrier. And he said one of the biggest troubles they have is just implementation itself, right? Because who is the TPA? Who am I supposed to be getting reports from? Did you carve out the PBM? Okay, who's going to send me reports? Because the carrier themselves, right, is not necessarily chasing down notice of claim. So they're saying, well, you help us with the implementation process. It's literally paperwork, and who's the contact over here and who's the contact over there. And you would think it'd be pretty simple, but there's a lot of moving parts, right, that still have to be kind of intermingled, or what's the word I want to say? I don't know. There was a big word I thought I had it in the tip of my tongue that wasn't there. But that I didn't really think about that. But that actually is an integral process of the onboarding, is just simply making sure everybody is talking to one another, so you don't end up with pointing fingers or somebody missed a filing a claim.
What I would say about that is we start that during the implementation process, and how we do that is with two simple initial calls. One with the broker consultant and Meritain, as well as our implementation team. We call it a welcome call.
Okay. Yeah.
So what I personally call it is, this is our Santa Claus list. And what I mean by that is we literally go through a list and we check it twice.
Yeah.
So we have that first call, that first welcome call with just the broker consultant. Hey, who's handling Cobra? Who's handling Hicra Nycra? Who's handling the run-in? Who's doing this? And what was sold? What products are we handling as Meritain?
Yeah. And
then we have a similar call with the broker consultant and the client on, hey, is there an FSA, HSA? And again, who's handling Cobra? Who's doing this? Oh, well, my payroll company is doing this. Okay, check. We don't need to do that. We don't need to set that EDI feed up. We don't need to process anything. So going through at the very beginning, and like I said, clearing up that static and communication on who's doing that. And we do that with two simple phone calls, that welcome call, and then that initial onboarding call with the client on board. So we're constantly communicating. And then through the implementation process, we're having weekly calls.
Okay.
To make sure everything lines up. So again, not letting anything drop through the cracks, and really shoring up that implementation.
Well, sounds like prior proper planning prevents piss poor performance.
Yes.
If I can bring back some of my high school days are entrenched in me in soccer, like, the people are telling you, just plan, right? Make sure you're getting out ahead of these things as potential problems that could come in the future, because you don't know, right, when this might be a problem. It might not be 6 months or maybe 12 months from now that one of those T's that you didn't cross all of a sudden becomes a major issue. So just really making sure on the front end that you're preventing those types of things. So I know we've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we get you out of here on time, man.
Sure.
I always want to ask this question, and I think over time I'll aggregate to maybe I have an idea where this industry is going, but future to you, like what are we looking like in the future of maybe your from your vision, or even Meritain? I'd love to feel like what you think this industry is moving toward.
So to start off with what I would call the near future and where it's heading to is transparency. So like I mentioned, the previous administration passed legislature on hospital transparency, surprise billing, no more surprise bills. and it's really a bigger lift than ACA, which if you work in the industry, like really a bigger lift than the ACA. And it's because I think it was the Kaiser Family Foundation that just came out with a study. And Wesley can pull it up. Can we say?
I don't know.
Say, Jamie, pull it up, just like Joe Rogan.
I don't know.
Maybe
We don't know if we have those capabilities here, but
it's fine. So
we'll come back to it.
In that Kaiser Family Foundation study, what they showed that over 50% of employer plans were not compliant.
Oh, really?
So, excuse me, not employer plans, hospital plans right now were not compliant with the transparency legislature that was out there in the policies. So it's really taking that technology piece and merging that with the claims data that we have and our contacts that we have with the hospital systems and saying, hey, here's how it was. And if you looked on a hospital website, when former President Trump said, hey, we want to know what the prices are, so you need to put these on your website. They were hidden. It was like a labyrinth of hey, click on this.
They're there.
They're there. They're on the website, but good luck finding it.
Yeah.
So it's really who's going to tackle that first. We're already in the process of doing that. It's a multi-million-dollar lift for us,
I'm sure,
as an enterprise of CVS, Aetna, and Meritain. And the person that leads that charge is going to lead the future of healthcare, the near future of healthcare. And where I see the true future of healthcare going kind of piggybacks off of that on, really having those data-driven decisions. Like we're seeing AI coming into the equation now. We're like, okay, what are the patterns that we're seeing so we can handle this 2, 3, 4 years down the road, which is how you should be looking at self-funding in general as a 3 to 5 year plan. So that's the direction that we're going, that I feel Meritain's going, because I talk about consistently with my broker consultant partners is we want to make sure our decision points are data driven. So do you have that population for a maternity management program? Do you have a high cancer population for a cancer program? And how are we handling, your common diseases that we deal with high blood pressure, high cholesterol, diabetes? Does the data show that we need to spend this extra money? And really, that's where I see the future of healthcare going, is those data-driven decisions on it makes sense to partner with a bundling service like Zero Card. It makes sense for Regenix and Hinge Health, or a Quantum Accolade, a navigation partner. So really having an ROI behind those decisions, but at the same time, does it make sense for the member? Are we going to continue to go down this role of being a advocate for healthier living by helping them navigate this crazy supply chain that we have in healthcare? And at the end of the day, are they going to get the care that they want?
Yeah, and that's, it's one of those things too. Like, I understand it within the context of our industry, right? We're talking about when people need care, how do they become better consumers of care? Know what they need to get, know the right place to go receive that care, lowest cost, highest value, or highest achievable outcome, and what is the combination of those. I also get frustrated on a personal level, right? By that time, we're already kind of too late. We haven't necessarily talked about the health of the person. What is that person doing in their daily life to prevent that? Of course, wellness has tried to tackle that. I don't know how successful that's been. But as somebody, you obviously stay fit. You have the CrossFit background. I'm sure you eat well and all those things. It's like, that's the single biggest thing that any individual could do. Has nothing to do with health insurance. Has nothing to do with how you receive care. It's what are you doing on a daily basis to prevent, hopefully, the need to ever go consume the care.
It's that behavioral aspect of our business. And it's probably the glaring red flag that the COVID pandemic brought up was, people are unhealthy. And I believe the statistic is 94% of the hospitalizations due to COVID were, those individuals were obese. Yeah. So it was that personal choice that kind of led them to not really combating COVID that much. Yeah. And it's my number one pet peeve of both administrations is no one brought up health.
Yeah.
How can you be healthier? How, take a vitamin D supplement, work out, eat healthier, go outside. It was, a vaccine. It was masking
Yeah.
up and all that helps. But it's we weren't tackling the root of the problem, like you.
Well, that's
just
yeah, like
mentioned, the behavioral
there's healthcare
health
crisis,
aspect.
right? The
Yeah,
expenses
healthcare
are out of
crisis.
control, trends out of control. Well, what's driving that underneath that? And you get probably different podcasts, different. We could spend an hour on that, which I love, but it's also frustrating because it's like we're trying to be part of the solution, right? But nobody necessarily talks about the easiest things. I always said I'll be a millionaire if I can figure out how to sell people a program where they fast every day for 16 hours. But like, what are you going to sell somebody? Like, don't eat for 16 hours. All right, write me a check for $20 for that. But there's not a lot of money in the simple things. But anyways, you don't want to go down that path because I could probably get myself in trouble. So Jonathan, I really appreciate you coming here today and talking about Meritain, talking about your TPA services. Where should people go to find you? LinkedIn,
I'm
where's
on
the best place?
LinkedIn. You can find my crazy trapeze video.
Yeah,
on LinkedIn.
Follow him on Instagram because his Instagram game is on point, man.
Is Dr. Jonathan Lopez, and then on LinkedIn it's just Jonathan Lopez, and you can find me on there and connect with me. And you can leave your information in the comments, like the famous YouTubers would like to say. Click and subscribe, comment below.
Make sure you subscribe and comment.
Subscribe.
So don't type Dr. J-Lo, though, into LinkedIn. You actually have to spell it out to find
spell
you.
it out. I don't know what you would get if you just Googled that. Please don't Google that.
Please don't Google that. Well, Jonathan, again, appreciate you coming on, man. Really a pleasure, and I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you, Spencer. Have a great day.
Take care, man.